G'day, hi, and welcome. Let's just jump into this. Alright, so today's topic I think is an interesting one. What I think makes the perfect kind of like first bike or beginner bike kind of stuff. Now, I'm going to go with the idea that you've taken a proper safety course and you know how to ride from learning, like the basic fundamentals and stuff like that. So now I'm going to go with the idea that you're looking for your first bike and you want something that you can live with for a little while before you get your dream bike. Now, the statistic is this up here in Canada that usually if you're going to put the bike down, it's going to be within the first year. And that's usually just, people with, they don't have um, basically the riding skills yet. So, like that's when you're going to have all your accidents or all that. And I think there is a formula of a bike, not necessarily a specific model, but a formula of a bike that I know is kind of like the no-brainer to de facto to go to. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in any one category. What it really comes down to is geometry. And a bike that's easier to manage and handle is easier to learn on, right? So, like this little Triumph here, I think is probably the best seating position you can get. It might not be the most comfortable bike, but it's the best seating position because mid controls, for example, is when the pegs are pretty much even like these Sportsters. These are great starter bikes. There might be a bit big displacement wise. This is probably the ultimate starter bike right here, a Ninja 500, just because everything about it keeps you upright. Like this bike here, the pegs are a little bit far back, but not too bad. So you want a bike that is easy to be comfortable on. And some of the sport touring bikes are not too bad, where you're upright enough, you're slightly leaned forward. But again, this is probably the formula of a bike that would be the best, most easiest to learn how to ride. So the more upright you are, the easier it is to do shoulder checks and stuff like that. So bars at a little bit higher, but not too high, not like ape hangers. Pullbacks are, they're a little bit tricky to get used to at low speeds. But basically, like the dirt bike riding position is pretty much the most relaxed riding position you can get in. Pegs pretty much directly below you. That kind of like you're sitting in a chair usually works best. If they're slightly back, it helps a little bit more when you're pulling your knees into the tank, which gives you better handling, for dodging, obstacles, whatever. So that's the formula of bike. You can see like here, that's a good formula right there. Again, easy to do shoulder checks, legs aren't cramped. Again, a little bit back, but on the pegs, but not too bad. Yeah, yeah. Dirt bike riding in the winter. So for me, like this here is a perfect riding position. Pretty much very relaxed. Knees are slightly back, but not too bad. Now I've ridden a lot of these. What you call it, Virago 750s. These bikes are excellent to ride. The pullbacks, yeah, they take a little bit of getting used to. Again, fine on the highway, but you might find them a little bit cumbersome down, at low speeds, but they're not that bad. But this bike here is an awesome bike to ride if you ever get a chance to ride one. They're a little bit hard to find now. Again, another perfect, this is like a perfect starter type of bike here, XS 650s type thing. Again, if you can find one still running. They're getting a little bit old, but the formula, I had one of these, is BMW, this kind of like a sport touring riding, but again, perfect seating position. You could ride for hours on end, your legs don't get tired. Again, a good riding position here. So you see the theme that I'm going for. So bars are up just enough so your elbows are slightly bent. Your pegs are not too far up, they're not too far back, they're not too far forward. So why not bikes with like forward controls, as they call them? I think like highway pegs and stuff like that. Well, the highway pegs or forward control bikes. I mean, they're a lot better than what they used to be, but they can be a bit wonky at low speeds. So when you're in traffic or whatever, what you might find is sometimes with highway pegs that, especially with a newer rider, they feel like they want to fall over. You know what I mean? Like you don't have that control where you can pull your legs, your knees into the tank, and really have good low speed control of the bike like you would if the pegs were, right in the center, just below you. Where when you're on that, you can pretty much steer the bike with the pegs. It's a really cool thing. Whereas highway pegs can be, again, they're fine when you're up and going, but at low speed, slow turns, left, right, whatever, like say at an intersection, you kind of feel like like your legs are just kind of like dangling there, and it can make the bike, for newer riders, it seems like it makes the bike feel a little bit more sketchy. So when you feel more planted on the machine, it really, and more natural and more relaxed, it feels less intimidating when you're for the newer riders. Now, when I took my riding course a couple of years ago, and then many, many, many years ago, my first riding course, because like I had an Ontario license before I had a Quebec one. Now, when I took that license way back when, right, I basically they did the course in Ontario, this is back in the 90s, on a GN 125. Think of like a pizza delivery bike. Like it was a very small bike, 125cc, so like this thing, like it couldn't get away on you. You know what I mean? It was the ultimate, okay, this is the ultimate beginner bike kind of thing in the parking lot. And again, you were sitting completely upright, pretty much like most of these bikes you're seeing. And what was really good about it was that it was just so easy to ride. Clutch was extremely light. The bars were what you call buckhorn style. So again, it was like you could really balance the bike. Almost like a high wire rack kind of thing. And then of course the pegs were center controls or mid controls, and you could basically really pull your knees into the tank, and you were comfortable. You could ride this bike all day, and your back was pretty much straight. Like you were as upright as possible, right? So great for low speed handling, great for beginners. Now, mind you, I'd already had dirt bike experience before I did that. This is back in 1992, 93, when this happens. My first, getting my first street bike license, and it was a good learner bike, but to go from that to something else. I remember there was one lady at the course, she got her learner's permit and everything like that, at the course, or what. It was weird how it happened, but anyway, she was able to ride, her husband and her had bought, he had a big, big bad Harley and whatever, big 1340cc bike, I can't remember what it was, and she had, again, her first street bike was going to be a Sportster, right? Which is not a bad street bike, but watching her take off, like going from that little Suzuki GN 125 to this 883 Sportster was, she stalled it 3 or 4 times because she was nervous, right? And you could tell when she was driving away on it, it's that's a bad first bike. And for her, it was just because it was such a beautiful machine that it's you're gonna feel like shit when it goes down on the ground. You know what I mean? Now I don't know if she ever crashed it or not. Hopefully not, but you never know, right? So I wouldn't recommend something shiny and new for your first bike. I know everybody wants to buy one bike and their dream bike for the first bike. No, make that your second, third bike, whatever. Find something that is cheap, in a displacement that you can live with. I typically would say stay away from all 300s, 250s. Stay away from them. You're going to outgrow them in 2 weeks. Go say 400 cc's and up is probably 400 cc's being on the small side. I would recommend a 650 for most people, because you're going to grow into a 650, and again, get something cheap, so that if you do crash it, you're not completely heart heartbroken or whatever. Like, I mean, like you're going to be embarrassed enough as it is. Even if you don't crash it, you're probably going to like drop the bike a few times. Like that's everybody drops bikes. I've dropped bikes. It happens. Uh, ex- what happens though is when you get more experience, you're less likely to drop the bike because you now know that, okay, lightweight bikes, yeah, the wind blows them over. I used to have one bike, my SR 500. That thing, the wind would blow it over like on a daily basis. It was just so like the bike was like 300 pounds. Uh, you try to park it in the wind, like it didn't matter where you parked this thing, the wind would blow it over. It was just, it had a long side stand on it too, which didn't make any sense. It just wasn't heavy enough, you know what I mean? My Kawasaki LTD 440, it got blown over a few times. Um, my much heavier BMW R72 R60/5, it never blew over. The wind couldn't blow it. The thing was almost 600 pounds. It couldn't blow it over. But what would get that one is if I put it on the center stand on a hot day, then the center stand would sink into, like, you'd have to put something under the center stand so it wouldn't, you know, sink into the pavement, and then get off balance, and then the stand would either fold up on you and down the bike could go. That happened to me a couple of times. Um, like it was just like nothing you could do about that. Like I always carried like pop cans or like pieces of wood or something to put under the side stand so they wouldn't sink in the pavement. And I've seen big bikes go down. It's like, okay, the side stand starts sinking into the pavement enough, then it starts to fold, and then all of a sudden, boom, down it goes. And it doesn't take long too. I remember one time I put my side stand out, and when I came out of the store, I was only in there like 5 minutes. It was already like the stand was already like 2 or 3 inches into the ground. It was like it would just like cook right through the pavement. It was like, I was like, no, especially if it's relatively new pavement. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, stuff like that. But the second course I took in Quebec when I got my license back again, because it had been expired for about 18 years, and I decided to get it back again. They here in Quebec, what they do is like anything below a 650. If you take your course, that's the biggest you can ride, right? But if you take it, like, learn on a 650 and up, then you can basically ride anything you want for your first bike. They don't care, as long as the insurance company will insure you, right? So 18-year-old wants a Ducati V4 for his first bike. Yeah, that's not probably, no one's going to insure you. It'd be like $11,000 insurance. Like, there's no one's going to insure you. Period. Yeah. So, but like, say you bought like a Ninja 400, that'd be a great beginner bike for somebody who wants a sport bike trainer. But what about say, the Ninja 500? Okay, if somebody wants to go into, like, say, a sport touring bike, a venture bike, possibly sport bike. That bike kind of, like, I've sat on them, and they are really, really a good ergonomic bike. Like, they really are. SV, like the Suzuki Bandit types. Again, more of like a sport bike trainer. So for cruisers, what would be a good cruiser? Well, when I took my course in Quebec, what they had for the basically in the parking lot, they had a couple of bikes there. They had a Vulcan 150. I rode it just because, like, I forget what happened anyway. We were short a bike or something like that. It's like, okay, someone's going to have to ride this bike for a little bit. I said, yeah, sure, why not? So I wanted to ride them out. So I rode that, and then I rode there was a chain-driven Virago 250. It was the instructor's bike, and he goes, I'm gonna let you ride my baby. And I'm like, that bike was so fun. It was so, like it was a great parking lot bike. I really got to say, it had pullbacks and everything like that. Big controls, excellent handle, great first bike, but it was a 250, right? So as soon as you get out of the parking lot, like, if you have to do any highway mileage on it at all, like, the thing would be blowing around in the wind. It would get old fast. It'd be a great city bike though, a great city commuter bike, and cheap to run. But we had basically the Suzuki Boulevards, S40s. They used to be formerly known as the Suzuki Savage, and they were 650. So again, if you learned on a 650 at the course, yeah, it was a bit heavier of a bike. I don't think it was the best choice of bike to learn on because of the forward controls. Now, mind you, that's a great Harley starter. Like, somebody wants that, like, soft tail kind of setup, or like cruiser, right? So that's what I had in the actual course in the parking lot. But on the road, I got a much nicer bike. Now, the people that were a little bit shorter got to stick with these Suzuki Boulevards, which I think would make an excellent first bike if you were mainly staying in the city. On the highway, I rode it on the highway just a little, because it's not so much it was underpowered. It was fast enough if you were going to just do the speed limit. It would be a little bit too underpowered to stay with, like, like the big bikes, like the big touring bikes and whatever. But it'd be fine enough for anybody. If you rode with people that rode the speed limit and only the speed limit, you were fine there. The problem was, is it was a single cylinder, right? So eyeballs rattling out of your head. The second thing, it was very close ratio gears, which make it really awesome shifting in the city. It's like click 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 kind of thing, right? But as soon as you get on the highway and you're in the fifth gear, the bike got very anemic very quickly at highway speed. Although it wasn't that bad. I mean, it was plenty. Like, you could live with this bike for a couple of years, you'd be fine. But the big one was the forward controls. I thought that the forward controls, the the handling was really good on the bike, but like the although the handlebars were really cool, they were like kind of like, they weren't drag bars, but they were kind of like shorter drag bars, which gave the front end a weird kind of feel. Like, it made the front end a bit floppy at low speeds. So like, it was good, and all of a sudden it just kind of want to dart to one side to the other. Fine for somebody who had experience, but for somebody not ready for it, it's a little bit of a trickier bike to kind of learn on. But if you learned on it, you're going to be able to ride just about anything. The forward controls weren't bad. Like, like your feet weren't dangling in the wind like on some bikes. But again, at the low speed, again, for somebody just out of the course, still a little bit nervous or whatever, those low speed corner, like intersection turns, you had to really learn how to trust a bike with, like, it's more intuitive to trust a bike with mid controls than forward controls. Like I say, it feels like your legs are just kind of dangling there. And the bike was very low, so it was easy to flat foot the bike. So again, making it a good learner bike. But again, would I recommend it as a first bike? Maybe yes, maybe no. Definitely good for people that were a little bit shorter. It would be a Harley trainer. Like I say, if you passed the course and you were able to go out on the road, you're going to be fine with this bike. It would be a good first bike. But if you were going to spend all that money, and let's say there was a Farrago 750 sitting beside the Suzuki Boulevard, I would go for the Farrago 750 any day. That bike is so bloody fun, and it's shaft drive too, so they were basically maintenance free, but torquey, and that 750 motor was just bulletproof. It was a great bike. They really were. My friend had one. If I wasn't riding my bike, I was riding his. But I don't know why I ended up riding his bike. But he'd be like, it'd be a nice day. He'd go to work, and then he'd call me up. He said, "Reg," he goes, can you do me a favor? I go, what? He goes, yeah. He goes, I got my buddy. He's going to drive my truck home, and can you bring my bike and my helmet? Just go, if my mom's not there, just go in the house, grab everything. Yeah, like I was there all the time, so it was like, it was mi casa su casa, right? And I'd just leave it alone. Yeah, I took Scott's bike, whatever, and I'd go and I'd pick it up and I'd bring it down to him, or whatever. And but mind you, I'd always take the longest way there, and this bike was just so fun, and I was like, it just had everything right on it, and it wasn't the prettiest of bikes, but it was a 750. You could live with this bike probably for your entire motorcycling career and be happy with it. They were that good. They weren't the fastest bike in the world, but they were fast enough. Like, 0 to 100 was actually quite impressive for the type of bike they were. It wasn't a sport bike by any imagination, but they handled well. They were great bikes. Good mileage, cheap on insurance, lots of power, good with 2-up on it, good handling at low speed, high speed. Within relative of a cruiser, not a sport bike, right? So they were a good bike. They were a really good bike. I thought it was his second bike, and it was like the perfect second bike for him. His first bike was a Seiko 400, which had so many problems, but he ended up buying the 750, and it took him a little while to get used to it, but after about 2 weeks, he was just flying on this thing. We rode everywhere on that. It was just it was awesome. But anyway, that's just one type of bike that I would highly recommend, like for a first bike, because it's something you can live with, right? Any of the Viragos, if you can still find them running, they're great bikes. They're great bikes. But the second bike that we used in my course was a Suzuki. What do you call them? Not SV. Yeah, SV 650. No, not SV. V-Star 650. Sorry. And these bikes are like the Harley Trainer. Like these bikes, they're a good looking bike. The ones we had were the classics. So that's the one with the big skirted fenders and everything. Now, I've did a review on that bike, and it was underpowered because the chassis on that is the same chassis as the V-Star 1100, which I think would be a really good bike for like a second bike or whatever. Probably even okay for a first bike if you were, if you had the abilities, like if you're a nervous rider, probably not the best bike for you. But it was basically the same chassis, same everything, with more engine. Now, the V-Star 650, these things are a dime a dozen. They're super popular. They look more Harley-ish than a Harley. They got floorboards, which was really awesome. It was the first bike. Well, sorry, lying to you. I spent 10 hours on the road with this bike in the course, right? So we did basically 16 hours in the parking lot, 10 hours on the road, right? Once you passed all the parking lot stuff, then you did your road test and final test, like like the following season or whatever. And that's or at the end of the season, whatever it was. After so many days, yeah, and I did it. And what was really cool was these bikes, they were really comfortable, but however, I wouldn't say they were the best first bike, because even though these things were the most forgiving clutch, like the clutch was bizarre on this thing. You would let it out for like a day and a half before the thing would catch, and it was designed for somebody who was like I'm not sexist here, but it was designed for like a lot of like nervous female riders. You know what I mean? Like that's the best way I could explain it. Where it's like where like they're just kind of like really scared to let the clutch out because they think the bike's going to take off like a rocket. Well, this bike was almost impossible to get it to take off like a rocket. Like you could pop the clutch and the bike would just crawl to speed. Like I mean, it was just so docile. It was unbelievable. But because it was so heavy, that's like it's about a 600-pound bike, which is for a 650 that's a bit much. You know what I mean? Because if you put a passenger on that, some luggage racks or stuff like that bike's going to be really bogged down. It's just not going to have the power. Like it looks like a big cruiser, but it's not. You know what I mean? So for somebody who just rides solo or rides, with a passenger, but just them two, yeah, it's fine for that. But if you want to keep up with the Gold Wings and the big Harleys and the all the all the big bikes out there, like the big Vulcans, the 1500, 1600 cc bikes, you'll be playing catch up all the time. But it was a comfy bike. It was a comfy bike, but it had the beach bars on it. So again, for shorter people, the bike was a bit wide. It was more wide because of image than practicality. So beach bars, yeah, they look cool, but like it's kind of like your arms are wider out than they really need to be. But again, the bike was comfortable. I spent 10 hours on it, in 2-hour blocks. Would I ever buy one? No, because it wouldn't be enough power for me. You know what I mean? Like it would. The bike would leave you wanting for as a tour bike, but it had floorboards. Now the floorboards and the big fat seat that was on it kept my big fat butt very, very comfortable. And with the beach bars and everything, like this bike, like on the highway was awesome, and it was okay at low speeds. The only thing is that this bike, because it was low and it had the floorboards, it didn't take much to scrape the floorboards on these things. So not really great for a beginner rider. And of course, because the bike was so wide, you couldn't really get your knees to the tank properly. It wasn't a great bike for a beginner. You know what I mean? Not that the bike would get away from you, but it was just like the bike, like it handled well enough for what it was, but it had a big fat tire in the front, big fat tire in the back. So the thing was, kind of like it was smooth, but it was just not. It wasn't a good responsive bike. You know what I mean? Like so, in a sense, it was good for a beginner because it was so docile. But it's also the type of bike where if you had a nervous beginner on there, you could see them running wide in all the corners, just because like the weird positioning. But other than that, it was a great bike. So it was a weird bike because I loved it. I loved it, and I didn't at the same time. But getting back to like again, CC displacement. Like I say, 400 cc's, 500 cc bikes would be the bare minimum I'd go for. A 650 is probably the best of all worlds. Where if you get a bike, like anything under, I'd say 750, you want the bike to be as light as possible. Not so light that the wind is blowing it over, but light enough that, and most 750s would be adequate weight anyway, but light enough that you, when you're riding it, say like a Honda Shadow 750, is a perfect bike to ride right there. Like that's a great beginner bike, and again, it's a 750, right? So something like that, or like I say, the older Viragos. I know they're getting old, but like those old Viragos, again, they were only built as heavy as they needed to be. You know what I mean? So you could take advantage of the engine, like not being too underpowered. A 650 is still pretty adequately powered if the chassis is light enough, right? So there's that. So depending on what style of bike you want to go into, the more cruiserish you go, the like I say, probably the top 650cc cruiser out there is going to be a V-Star 650. They're like I say, they're just super super popular. But like if I had a choice, say for the same money, which you'd probably get, the V-Star probably cheaper, but if I had to pick between a V-Star 650 and say like an older Sportster 88300, I would take the 88300 because it's like 100 pounds lighter, and you got about almost 200 pounds or 200 cc's, almost 300 cc's more, right? That would be a better bike, power to weight. Although, and of course, the ergonomics of the Sportster would be much more forgiving. So that just gives you an idea. Another bike that'd be really good, like some of the naked bikes out there are really good. But again, it depends on what kind of like the old Honda CB750s and CB550s and stuff like that. Those things were awesome to ride. Like they were so docile, but yet they had enough engine and they were light enough. They were under the 500-pound mark, right? But again, these are older bikes, so you might not find them as much. I think the most perfect starter bike you could get was probably a Virago 535. Again, older bike, it's a 90s bike, but if you can find one, fantastic bike. I got to ride one once. It was really good. Ergonomics were, like, for example, like VMAX anything, not for a beginner. Those VMAXs, Gen 1, Gen 2, I've only ever ridden the first generation of them, and it put a grin on my face like you wouldn't believe. They were fun bikes. They were so torquey. Very fast bike. But I remember it was a Yamaha Radian. That one wasn't too bad, but again, more of a sport bike trainer. The XJ750s, again, sport bike kind of ish trainer. The Seika 750, XJ750. Those bikes, they were kind of, sort of a cruiser, sort of not. They handled well enough. The 4-cylinder, 2-cylinder, whatever. Usually for a beginner bike, twin cylinder bikes are really, really the way to go. I know a lot of the beginner bikes now have more of a sport bike orientation to them, like the R3s and the Yamaha R3s and the Ninja 300s and stuff like that. And they are great bikes, but the problem with them is that they're really underpowered. You know what I mean? Like, they're great bikes because they're cheap on insurance. You can ride the crap out of them all day, but and I'm not talking about guys on the track, but they're underpowered for the highway. You know what I mean? Like, they're underpowered for the highway, and that. But other than that, like ergonomically, they are, you can get very proper riding techniques off them. But again, if you're going to go for the cruisers, there's so many type of cruisers like Vulcan 850s or Vulcan 800s or whatever that you can get. You can get all kinds of bikes like that. Like the Honda Shadow line is just, pick a CC displacement, any displacement, right? So it depends on what type of bike you want to go for, but I would really, with a lot of the cruisers, a lot of the cruisers actually don't have, like the Japanese bikes definitely don't have the pegs in a bad spot. So that makes them very easy to learn. Where what gets you is the weight, and I talked about that in other videos, where like the heavier the bike, the you know the more skills you're going to need to learn with it, even if the bike is relatively docile while you're riding it. But it's that low speed handling stuff. So if you can keep a bike around the 400-pound mark, mid controls, buckhorn style bars, as much upright seating as you can. Bench seat doesn't really matter as much. Bench seats are easy in some ways because you can move around on them easy. You're not as locked in, but they're not as comfortable. So depending on what you had, like for example, my first street bike was a Kawasaki LTD 440, and that was probably the best beginner bike. It was a 6-speed. It was a great bike. It had a step-up seat, so it had lumbar support. It had pullback bars, which were again a little bit weird to get used to at low speed, but like the bike was so docile it didn't matter. Fun bike though. It was a belt drive too. It was such a fun bike. Got great miles. That thing got like 75 miles to the gallon. It was an awesome bike, but it was underpowered. It was a 440. It was a 440. So something like something that you can live with. 650cc, 500cc. You can live with those for a while. 750. Lots of like I know bikes are kind of getting weird now, where it's like it's hard. It's either you get a 300cc beginner bike or you get like 1800 cc's. It seems like there's kind of like the middle ground's kind of like disappearing. But there's lots out there. But I think the ergonomics, for example, like the new Harley Sportster S, probably not a great beginner bike. But if you look at the seating position on it, it looks like it's not a bad bike. I probably wouldn't want that as your first bike, just in case you down it. And again, Harleys, they're getting better. But they don't handle well. They put too big of tires on the front, too big a tire on the back, and then usually they don't have the ground clearance to go around corners, which is a bad combination, right? So that just is what they are. But excuse me, sorry. Most people buy like those type of bikes for at a level when they've been riding for a while and they know what they want anyway. So image or whatever. Something like I say a Ducati Monster, again, probably not a great first bike, but the ergonomics of it is pretty good. So again, sort of a sport bike trainer. A bike that's really awesome to sit on is like again, probably not the best for a first bike because of the price, but like a Thruxton 900. Those bikes are just like you could ride them all day. You know what I mean? The pegs are right where you need them to be. The ground clearance is as high as you need it to be. They are a bit of a tall bike though. That's the other thing too. For newer riders, if you can get a bike that's not too tall for you, that you can flat foot, although proper riding techniques, it doesn't really matter, but it makes it easier when you can flat foot the bike, at least with one foot. You know what I mean? Without canting the bike too much. So, big adventure bikes, you're always on a tiptoe. You know what I mean? And basically, sport bikes, venture bikes, tall bikes in general, you typically ride them one foot down, not both feet down. You should be, even your cruisers, you should be riding with just one foot down. You really don't need to put both feet down. I mean, when you're fully stopped and you want to, pop the bike in neutral if you're sitting there for a while, yeah, sure, put both feet down. But most bikes aren't designed to have both feet down. They're usually designed, unless they're a cruiser typically, they're usually designed to have like one foot on the, covering the back brake all the time. So which is the better riding method, right? Uh, so I guess that's about all I got to say about it. I thought it was an interesting topic because I don't really ever hear about people talk about ride position, and I think it's very crucial when to your learning. Like once you've ridden a bike for a couple of months on the road, and I mean like not the guy that rides like 3 times a year, just because there's not a cloud in the sky. That's the only time they go out, or 2 or 3 days a week, like they ride a little bit. I'm talking you've put some mileage on, like you've spent all day on it for like a couple of times, like Saturday, Sunday, you're out there all the time. You ride back and forth to work all week, rain or shine, kind of like those guys. They'll learn their bikes a lot faster. Usually, what I get, no, I'll just give you an idea of what I'm talking about, like with the forward controls and stuff. It always goes like this. It's usually a husband and wife. The husband buys typically a big bike of some sort, most likely going to be a Harley, like Street Glide or Road Glide. Great bike, no problem there. And then his wife, too intimidated to be riding the big bike, she thinks that, okay, well, I'll get the Sportster, but not realizing the Sportster is still a big bike. Like the smallest Sportster is 883, right? So that's nearly 900cc bike, right? So well, it's over like an 850cc bike. That's still pretty big. Um, and I'll be riding along, and it always goes like this. If it's just Harleys themselves, and I know Harley Davidson is the most popular motorcycle out there. I know their popularity is waning because they're coming up against some really weird things, like with emissions and stuff like that. So, like for example, the new Sportster S looks like a cool bike, but it's no longer a Sportster. You know what I mean? Like it's a totally new bike. It's got overhead cams now, which is cool, but now it looks more like a Japanese bike, right? It doesn't look like a Harley anymore. And so they're going through those turmoils trying to find new riders, right? But anyway, I digress. Will they be successful? Who knows? But anyway, people still like the sports. They like the chrome. They like the classic look. They like the pushrod engine. That's why people buy Harleys. They like the pushrod engine. They want the 36 knuckle, you know what I mean? Or the 48 pan. That's what they want. They just want a newer version of it that doesn't leak. And you get all these Harley riders in a row, and I'll come up behind them, especially if I'm on the sport bike, right? This didn't matter what bike I was on. Even when I had my old Harley 48 panhead chopper, it was still the same. You'd come up behind the group, and the group would be, like, every corner was like 45 miles an hour or less. I mean, they would just slow right down. Why? Because half the riders, which would be newer riders in the group, mainly women, not picking on women, but mainly women, you could tell that they were nervous on the corners, right? Now, the ones that had the Sportsters, those women seemed to zip through those corners like nothing. They were comfortable, they were confident, they'd hold the line, no problem. But the ones that had the big twin with the forward controls, or even the floorboards, they would tend to be like, you could tell that they were kind of like fearing the corner, like, oh, the bike's leaning too much, or that kind of thing. And you would see them running wide in the corners all the time because it was just too heavy of a bike. But just, I think it was just a seating position. Like you'd see their leg. These would be shorter women, so their legs would be like stretched right out. Trying to reach these forward pegs on these big twin Harleys, right? And yeah, it's not, if you're not comfortable, you don't ride well, right? So you could tell that these women probably didn't do a lot of time, riding. So those bikes were too much for them for their riding levels. But then again, you got that same woman throw on a Sportster with a proper riding position, like I say, an 883 hugger, where they could, even the shortest women could go flat-footed on it. They would just get the confidence to ride a lot quicker. So I use the 883 hugger as a a good example of a proper geometry bike to learn on. Like it's comfy. Again, yeah, your eyeballs are going to rattle out of your head. The Sportsters are fun. I've ridden them. I've ridden Iearn heads, so I mean, yeah, your eyeballs rattle out of your head. The most buzzy bike I've ever ridden has got to be my old SR 500. That was a 500cc thumper. The thing weighed like 300 pounds. This thing was just, your hands were buzzing, your eyeballs were buzzing. But it was a fun bike. It was a freaking evil bike, but it was a fun bike. But again, good geometry, right? Easy to whip around, And that I think is very crucial, especially for your first year or so of riding. Uh, so a lot of great bikes out there. Too many to list, but I would look for the formula of the bike more rather than worrying about the actual make and model or whatever. I mean, you can do all that research too. Again, get a displacement that you can live with for a couple of years. Like I say, a 650 you can live with probably for the entirety of your motorcycle, career, so to speak, rather than get something like a 300, which you're going to outgrow it right away, and you'll outgrow it the second you have to go do a group ride. Now, the second type of group ride that I noticed, now I guess I'll wrap it up fairly soon, is when you got like mixed type of bikes. You got Gold Wings, you got Harleys, you've got V Stars, you've got Vulcans, you've got Rocket 3s, you got everything like that. Those groups tend to move faster because it seems like those are the guys and gals that are now riding bikes that uh, like, for example, and I've met a many female rider. I don't know, I'm talking so much about female riders today, but usually when you look at, you know, like back in the 90s, like very few women rode motorcycles in the 90s in comparison. Like it was a treat to see a woman riding a motorcycle. Like everybody would encourage her, right? So for every one female rider, there'd be about 1,000 male riders, right? It was really a male-dominated sport. It still is, but you see more women getting into it, right? And that's great. I mean, I think everybody should ride a motorcycle. Maybe not everybody, but most people, because it is very enjoyable. But if you ever see women on Harleys, sometimes you don't know if that's their first bike or their second bike. A lot of times it's people with a lot of money, and the husband wants his wife to ride the Harley, and it's too much bike too soon. A lot of times, right? Especially some of these bikes, 6, 7, 8, 900 pounds, right? I've talked about weight in the previous video. Those aren't beginner bikes. Heavy bikes aren't beginner bikes. But I've never met a female rider on a Goldwing that didn't ride the piss out of like 10 other bikes first. Yeah, whenever you see a female rider on a Goldwing, she knows how to ride. It just seems to be like that was, no, I picked and when you ask them why they're riding a Goldwing and not a Harley, and they'll tell you exactly why. I ride it because the Goldwing, it's got better engine. It's 1,800 cc's. It's I tour like 10,000 kilometers or 6,000 miles a year on this thing. And I ride it every day to and from work, rain or shine. Like they're they're all the gear all the time. Like but those are few and far between. But that's usually what I found, right? And then, like I say, when you find like a mixed rider where it's mixed cruisers and Harleys together, and Goldwings and whatever venture bikes whatever you can think of, pretty much everything but sport bikes. Sport bikes tend to stick to themselves, right? Me, I'll ride with anybody, but though that's when I find that's usually the group that has all the experience. But it's usually when it's just one type of bike, which is usually the one type of bike. And usually when I see for female riders, again, the V-Star 650s, like they're so popular with again, it gives you the illusion that you're riding a big bike when you're not. Now, mind you, the 1100 is the same bike. It's just they just put a bigger engine in it, which I would like to ride the V-Star 1100 just to see how much more, like you almost got double the displacement there. It'd be interesting to see because they are nice bikes. They're like I say, they're comfortable, everything like that. Like I say, the 650 was underpowered, but mind you, if you had a lighter version of and there is a cruiser version of the V-Star 650, that bike probably would be better because it, with the skinnier front tire. Light, like if you can knock 100 pounds off that bike, it would really help out that engine. Like I said, 600-pound bike on a 650cc bike, that's a bit much weight, especially if you want to take passengers and stuff like that. But anyway, so but yeah, you can go look at, there's all kinds of weird kind of half-naked bikes out there. I can't think of any, like I know like there's a CBR 500s and stuff like that. 550s or whatever. Those again more of a sport bike trainer. Like it seems like all the trainer bikes are more geared towards sport bikes, fairing based bikes. Whereas years ago everything was pretty much like a cruiser. So I mean there's a little bit of everything out there, but yeah, like there's I know a really good starter bike, night rod, not night rod. What's the Harley one there? The 750 street rod? No, what the heck do they call it? I don't know. I don't even know if they still make it. They made a 500 and a 750. I bet you that 750 would be a real fun bike. You know, I bet you that'd be a really good bike. Um, I've never seen one up close. I don't even know if they're still making them. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, okay. So I guess that's all I got for now. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. But yeah, really give like riding position for your first bike. Really, I would put that kind of priority because it will really make or break how you learn and what you're learning for. Like the sport touring, the dirt bike kind of setup. The real upright stuff, mid controls, like I say, buckhorn bars, anything that can allow you to, do really easy shoulder checks, anything that, is in a displacement that you can live with, like I say, 500 cc's to maybe like 750 or whatever, maybe 900 cc's, probably a little bit much, depends on the type of bike, right? Like cruisers, the thing with the cruisers, like when you get big engine displacements on the cruisers, is you start getting heavier bikes, right? So take weight into consideration, take displacement into consideration, but the riding position, like the easier and more ergonomic the bike is, the safer it is to learn how to ride on. So anyway, I'll leave it at about that. So if you like this content, all links are down below to help support the channel. Next to that, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like, be true to yourself, be true to others. Always do the right thing. Have yourselves a great day.